a widowed mechanic, a 7-year-old girl with a broken arm, and one manila envelope that could stop a $100 million land deal. When Everett Cross walked into Vance Development's glass tower with grease still under his fingernails and his daughter's hand wrapped in his, he had maybe 3 minutes before security decided he didn't belong there. What the people in that building didn't know was that the man they were about to throw out held the legal power to bury everything they'd spent 2 years building. The lobby of Vance Development smelled like money and fresh paint, the kind of place where even the air felt curated. Everett pushed through the revolving door, and the noise of downtown Harlow Creek fell away like someone had thrown a switch. Glass, walls, marble floors, a reception desk the size of a small aircraft carrier. His work boots made the wrong sound against the tile. Too heavy, too real. Gracie's hand tightened in his. "It's shiny," she said quietly. She was 7, with her mother's dark eyes and her mother's habit of saying exactly what she was thinking. She was wearing her purple jacket with the star on the pocket, the one she'd picked out herself at the thrift store last spring. One of her shoelaces was untied. He'd meant to fix it before they came in. "Yeah," he said, "real shiny." The woman at the reception desk had perfect hair and a smile that had been professionally installed. Her nameplate said Renata. She looked at Everett the way people sometimes looked at a car that had been parked in the wrong spot. Not hostile exactly, just waiting for him to realize his mistake and move along. "Can I help you? I need to see Sylvia Vance." Renata's smile didn't change. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's about the Millbrook Acres acquisition." Something moved behind her eyes, not much. Just a slight recalibration, the way a gauge needle twitches when something shifts in the system. "Mrs. Vance is in a board session. If you'd like to schedule, I have documents she needs to see before she closes anything." Everett kept his voice level. He'd practiced this on the 40-minute drive down from Harlow Creek, talking it through while Gracie slept in the back seat. "Stay calm. Be clear. Don't let them see the fear. It concerns the mineral rights on the Millbrook parcel. The acquisition is legally compromised." "Sir." Renata picked up her phone. "I'm going to need to ask you to wait while I... Just tell her my name, Everett Cross. She'll know what it means." Renata spoke quietly into the receiver. Listened. Spoke again. The whole time her eyes stayed on him the way you'd watch a dog you weren't sure about. Then she hung up, and her voice got a little cooler. "Security will be with you in a moment." 2 men in gray blazers came from somewhere to the left, moving with that practiced, unhurried speed that meant they'd done this before. The taller one had close-cropped hair and hands like a carpenter. The shorter one had the eyes of someone who'd learned patience the hard way. "Sir," the taller one said, "we're going to need you to step outside. I'm not causing any trouble." Everett didn't move. "I just need 2 minutes with Sylvia Vance. I have legal standing related to the transaction she's about to sign." "We understand." "You can contact the legal department through..." "I've been trying to contact the legal department for 9 days." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "They don't return calls. They don't respond to emails. I've sent certified letters. I drove down here because this is the only thing left I can do." He looked at the taller guard, not angry, just direct. "I'm not trying to cause a problem. I'm trying to stop one." The shorter guard moved to his other side, boxing him in. Easy and quiet, the way you'd move furniture. Gracie pressed against his leg. He looked down at her. Her eyes were wide. She'd been 3 years old when her mother got sick, 4 when Vanessa died, and somewhere in those years she'd learned to read rooms the way other kids learn to read books. She read this one perfectly. He could see it happening. "Hey," he crouched down to her level. "It's okay. These men are just doing their job. Are they going to make you leave? Maybe. But we're okay either way. You look worried. I'm not worried. I'm just working on a problem." She considered this with the gravity of someone 3 times her age. Like when the Henderson's transmission was wrong and you had to figure out which part was lying? Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Yeah, like that." The taller guard cleared his throat. "Sir, if you'll come with us." Then the elevator chimed. Everett stood up and looked. The doors opened on the far side of the lobby and a woman stepped out. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, carrying herself with the particular confidence of someone who had survived enough rooms that most rooms no longer impressed her. Dark blazer, heels that added 2 inches she didn't need, hair pulled back in a way that made her seem sharper than she probably was at rest. She was talking to a man in a blue suit, Something about closing timelines and the county recorder's office, her voice low and clipped. Sylvia Vance. She was smaller than he'd expected from the photos on the company website, but the way the two security guards straightened slightly when they saw her, that was exactly what he'd expected, Mrs. Vance. His voice carried across the lobby, not loud but clear. She stopped, looked at him. Did the same quick inventory Renata had done. Boots, jeans, the worn canvas jacket, Gracie standing at his side, and her expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. "Who are you?" "Everett Cross. I'm the owner of Cross Automotive on Route 9 in Harlow Creek, and I'm the sole heir to the Cross Delwood mineral rights easement, which runs beneath 63 acres of the land you're buying today." Silence in the lobby. The man in the blue suit stopped mid-reach for his phone. Sylvia Vance walked closer. She moved like she was conserving something, energy, maybe, or patience. She stopped about 10 feet away and looked at him with flat, measuring eyes. "Those rights were vacated in 2009, she said. "Our legal team confirmed it. Your legal team was wrong. The vacatur was filed incorrectly and was overturned on appeal in 2011. It's on record with the State Land Office in Bartfield, has been for 14 years. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I have the documentation here." Something moved in her face, something he couldn't read, then it was gone. "Marcus," she said, without looking at the man in the blue suit, "call security supervisor and tell him we have a situation. Ms. Vance, if you'd just look at. And call the police." The man in the blue suit, Marcus, blinked. "Sylvia, this man is trespassing and attempting to interfere with a lawful business transaction. I want him removed." Her voice was perfectly steady, perfectly certain. The voice of someone who had decided that whatever this was, it wasn't worth the cost of her time. Now. Everett felt the ground shift under him. He'd known this was a possibility. He'd run the scenario in his head a dozen times on the drive down. He just hadn't believed they'd actually do it. Not with Gracie standing right there. The guards moved, one on each side of him. Not rough, but definite. Gracie made a small sound. "Hey!" He twisted toward her, getting his hand free to reach for hers. Look at me, Gracie Bird." She looked. Her lip was trembling. "This is going to be okay, I promise you. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I will always come back for you. You understand?" "Always." "I know," she whispered. "But I don't want you to go." "I know." He squeezed her hand once, then let the guards steer him. He let them. There was no percentage in fighting it, and he didn't want her to see that. He didn't want her to carry that. The envelope fell from his hand when they turned him toward the door. It hit the marble floor with a flat slap and skidded 2 feet. He looked back over his shoulder. Sylvia Vance was watching him leave. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was the expression of someone who had already filed this moment away as resolved and was thinking about the next thing on her list. Behind her, Marcus was picking up the envelope. The revolving door swallowed Everett and pushed him out into the afternoon. The sound of traffic came back like a wave. A patrol car was pulling up to the curb, lights off, no urgency. Just 2 officers responding to a call about a trespasser. The math of the moment was already written on their faces before they'd even gotten out of the car. They were decent about it. One of them, a younger woman with a quiet manner, took Gracie aside and talked to her while her partner handled Everett. Asked Gracie her name. Asked if there was someone they could call. Gracie told them about the shop, about Mrs. Aldrich who lived 2 lots down and sometimes watched her when Everett had a late job. Everett gave them Mrs. Aldrich's number. He gave them his own, calmly, like a man who had done nothing wrong and knew it. They put the cuffs on him anyway. "Trespassing," the officer said. "Possibly more pending review." He didn't look back at the building when they walked him to the cruiser. He didn't want to give Sylvia Vance the satisfaction of watching him watch her. But in the back of the patrol car, behind the scratched partition, he closed his eyes and thought about his father, who had told him once that the Cross name meant something. That there were things attached to it that no one could take, no matter how much they wanted to. His father had been a difficult man in most of the ways that counted, but he hadn't been wrong about that. At the Harlow Creek Police Substation, they put him in a room with a folding table and 2 plastic chairs and told him to wait. He waited. He thought about the Millbrook land, 63 acres of rolling valley on the eastern edge of the county that his great-grandmother had once owned outright. the mineral rights his grandfather had carved out and protected even when the land itself was sold, the easement that had passed to his father, and then quietly, without fanfare or explanation, to Everett, along with a shoebox of documents and a handwritten note that said only, "You'll know when this matters." He hadn't known. Not for a long time. He'd been too busy learning how to be a father alone, how to keep the shop running, how to answer Gracie's questions about her mother in ways that were honest without being crushing. The shoebox had sat on the top shelf of his closet for 3 years. He'd opened it 9 days ago, when he saw the survey stakes going into the ground on the Millbrook Road and recognized the coordinates from an old plat map his father had made him memorize as a kid. The door to the room opened. A woman in her 50s stepped in, carrying a briefcase and wearing the calm expression of someone who was never surprised by anything. Her gray hair was cut short and practical. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, like she'd had them there so long she'd stopped noticing. She sat down across from him. "Mr. Cross," she said, "my name is Dorothea Finch. I'm an attorney with Finch and Associates in Bartfield. I've been retained by your family's estate trust for the past 11 years. Everett stared at her. "My father's been dead for 6 years. I know. He retained us before he passed. He left specific instructions regarding the Millbrook easement and what we were to do if someone ever moved to develop that land." She set her briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 clean clicks. "He was very thorough, your father." Frustrating to work with, honestly. But thorough. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Those are the easement records, the appeal documentation, and the original deed notation from 1958. Your rights are valid, registered, and enforceable. Ms. Vance's legal team either didn't look hard enough or chose not to look at all." Everett opened the folder. He'd seen most of it before, in the shoebox. But seeing it organized and official made something settle in his chest. "How did you know I was here?" "You sent a certified letter to Vance Development 9 days ago. A copy was routed to us as a precautionary measure. Your father set that up. When Ms. Vance's team failed to respond, we began preparing." Dorothea looked at him over the top of her glasses, with the equanimity of someone who had long since stopped being shocked by human behavior. "I was in the parking lot when they arrested you. I've already spoken with the district attorney's office. The charges will be dropped within the hour, and the acquisition is currently on hold, pending an emergency injunction I filed with the county court this morning." She paused. "You have legal authority to block this sale entirely, Mr. Cross, or to renegotiate the terms. That choice is yours." He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, which was water-stained and institutional and thoroughly unimpressive. He thought about Millbrook Acres, about the plans Vance Development had filed with the county, a mixed-use resort complex, luxury cabins, a private airstrip, all of it sitting on top of an aquifer that fed 3 municipal wells and the creek that ran through the Harlow Valley Nature Preserve, the last undisturbed wetland in the county. "What's actually underneath that land?" he asked. "If they drill." Dorothea was quiet for a moment. "The aquifer, as you know. If they pull mineral rights and start extraction, or if they sell those rights to an energy company, which their development partner has done on 4 previous projects, the well contamination risk to the surrounding area is significant." "How significant?" "Potentially catastrophic for the municipal water supply serving about 9,000 people. He set the folder down. "Then I need to block it." Dorothea nodded as if she'd expected nothing else. "Then we'll block it." She closed her briefcase. "I'm going to get you out of here. And then we're going to walk back into that building, but this time with paperwork they can't ignore." An hour later, Everett walked back through the revolving door of Vance Development with Dorothea Finch at his side and a filed injunction in her briefcase. He'd washed his hands at the substation sink, for all the good it did. There was still grease in the creases of his knuckles that no amount of soap removed anymore. It was part of his hands now. Had been for 20 years. Renata recognized him the moment he came through the door. Her hand moved toward the phone. Dorothea was faster. She crossed the lobby in 3 strides and set her business card and a copy of the injunction on the desk before Renata had finished dialing. "Dorothea Finch, Finch and Associates. We're here to see Sylvia Vance. This is not a request." Renata read the document. Then she made a phone call. Then she made another one. Then someone Everett hadn't seen before. A woman in her 30s, with the focused look of an in-house counsel, came down from the elevators and took one look at the paperwork and went very still in the way that lawyers went still when something had just become significantly more complicated. They were shown to a conference room on the 14th floor and told to wait. The conference room had a long table and windows that looked out over the city. Everett stood at the windows and looked out while Dorothea reviewed her notes. The city spread below them, gray and specific in the afternoon light. "Tell me about the development partner," he said. "Brunner Capital. They've done 7 projects with Vance in the last 12 years. On 4 of them, they acquired mineral or extraction rights as part of the deal structure, then sold those rights to energy companies within 18 months of closing." Dorothea flipped a page. The extraction operations on 2 of those projects resulted in contamination complaints from neighboring property owners. One resulted in a state environmental fine. They paid it and moved on. Everett turned from the window. "And Sylvia Vance knows this?" "She knows about Brunner Capital's history. Whether she knows about the contamination risk specific to the Millbrook aquifer is what we're here to establish." Dorothea's voice was precise and neutral. Either she knows and proceeded anyway, or she doesn't know because her team didn't look. The first is worse, but the second isn't comfortable either. The conference room door opened and Sylvia Vance came in. She was alone this time. No Marcus, no assistant. Just her in the same blazer, with the same flat measuring look, except now there was something underneath it that hadn't been there in the lobby. Not uncertainty exactly. More like the controlled adjustment of someone who had just discovered the math had changed. She sat down at the head of the table. Dorothea sat across from her. Everett remained standing. "Miss Vance," Dorothea began, "my client holds a registered mineral rights easement on the Millbrook Acres parcel, established in 1958 and continuously maintained. The easement gives him veto authority over any extraction activity on or beneath the property, as well as right of first refusal on any conveyance of those rights to a third party. Your acquisition cannot legally close without his written consent. Our legal team reviewed the mineral rights status," Sylvia said. "The cross easement was vacated. The vacatur was overturned on appeal in 2011. The documentation was filed with the State Land Office in Bartfield and has been part of the public record for 14 years. Dorothea slid the folder across the table. "Page 7. Sylvia opened it. "Read. Turn to page 7. Read more slowly." The room was quiet except for the distant sound of the building's HVAC system and the muffled noise of the city below. "This should have been found," Sylvia said finally. Not to Dorothea, not to Everett, more to the air in front of her. The voice of someone calculating out loud. "Yes," Dorothea agreed. "It should have." Sylvia set the folder down. She looked at Everett for the first time since they'd sat down. Really looked at him, not the scan from the lobby, but something more careful. "What do you want, Mr. Cross?" "I want to talk about Brunner Capital." Something changed in her face. A slight tightening around the eyes. "What about them?" "Their track record on mineral rights. What they've done with them on previous Vance development projects." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "I've done my research. 4 projects. 3 of them resulted in extraction operations within 18 months of closing. 2 of those resulted in contamination complaints. Those projects are not relevant to. The Millbrook aquifer feeds the municipal wells for Harlow Creek, Delwood, and part of Crestview County," Everett said. "Combined population, about 9,000 people. Including my daughter, who is 7 years old and currently sitting in my neighbor's kitchen because her father got arrested this afternoon." His voice was steady. He hadn't planned to mention Gracie, but it came out anyway, and he didn't take it back. "If Brunner Capital acquires the mineral rights as part of this deal and sells them to an extraction company, which is what they do, the contamination risk to that aquifer is significant. I have a hydrology report that says so." Sylvia was very still. "You hired a hydrologist?" "I hired one 3 weeks ago, when I started understanding what this deal actually was." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and put a second envelope on the table. Thinner than the first, but heavier. "The report is in there. I also have the documentation on Brunner Capital's previous extraction deals and the contamination complaints. I had help putting it together." He'd had more than help. He'd had Dorothea's paralegal working 14-hour days, a retired environmental engineer he'd found through the Harlow Creek Library's local business network, and 3 evenings of his own research after Gracie was in bed, cross-referencing state land records on his laptop, with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He hadn't slept more than 5 hours any of those nights. Sylvia didn't open the envelope. She was looking at him with something different in her expression now. Something complicated. "Mrs. Vance," Dorothea said quietly, "I want to be direct with you. My client has the legal authority to block this acquisition entirely. He's not here to do that. He's here because he believes you may not be fully aware of the risk your development partner represents, and he'd rather give you the chance to address that than simply file a permanent injunction and let the courts sort it out." Sylvia's jaw worked. "That's very generous." "That's the reality," Everett said. "I don't want to sink your project. I want to sink the part of your project that poisons the water supply for 9,000 people." He put his hands flat on the table. They were a mechanic's hands, scarred and stained, not the hands that belonged in this room. He was done apologizing for them. Those are different things, and I think if you read what's in that envelope, you'll see the difference. She looked at the envelope. She didn't move toward it. "Brunner Capital is your primary equity partner on this project," Dorothea said. "Without them, the deal restructures significantly. But the project itself," she paused. "There are other ways to develop Millbrook Acres that don't involve mineral extraction. Our client's easement would remain in place regardless, but if Ms. Vance chose a development structure that excluded mineral rights entirely, there would be no basis for conflict." The room stayed quiet. Then Sylvia reached out and picked up the envelope. She opened it. She read. She read for a long time, and no one spoke, and outside the windows the city did what cities did, indifferent to everything happening in this room. When she finally set the report down, she looked like someone who had just done a calculation and not liked the result. "Where did this hydrologist come from?" she asked. "He's retired. Lives in Delwood. His name is Patrick Greer. He spent 30 years with the State Environmental Office." Everett paused. "He's the one who told me about the 2018 complaint in Crestview County, the water there. He was part of the team that investigated." Something moved behind Sylvia's eyes. Then, with the careful deliberation of someone making a decision they couldn't take back, she closed the folder and looked at Marcus, who had come in quietly sometime in the last few minutes and was standing near the door with the expression of a man waiting to be told what to do. "Get our environmental compliance team on the phone," she said, "and get legal. Tell them to hold everything on the Millbrook closing." She looked back at Everett. "I want to read the full hydrology report before we continue this conversation." "It's all in the folder." "I know." Her voice was different now. The flat managerial efficiency was still there, but underneath it something had shifted. "I also want to understand how this easement was missed." "I'd be interested in that too," Everett said. She almost said something. He could see it almost happen. Then she pulled it back. "I need the room," she said to Marcus. "Tell Brunner Capital the closing is postponed pending an environmental review. Don't explain further." Marcus hesitated. "Sylvia, they're not going to. Tell them." Her voice was quiet and entirely certain. "And then come back and help me figure out how a registered easement sat in the public record for 14 years and never appeared in a due diligence report." Marcus left. Dorothea caught Everett's eye and gave him a small nod that meant something was going right. That was the beginning. What followed was 3 weeks of due diligence reviews, legal depositions, and late-night phone calls from Dorothea that always started with, "I need you to understand something." The something was usually complicated and important and occasionally alarming. What it came down to was this. The mineral rights had been missed because the due diligence contractor Vance Development used. A firm called Radnor Group had pulled records from a database that was 14 months out of date. The appeal that restored the Cross easement in 2011 simply wasn't in it. Whether that was an honest oversight or something more comfortable than honesty was a question that eventually landed on several desks, including one belonging to the State Attorney General's office. Brunner Capital pulled out of the Millbrook project the moment the environmental review surfaced the aquifer data. They did it quietly, through their lawyers, with a brief statement about market conditions that fooled no one. Everett read about it on a Tuesday morning while Gracie ate cereal and watched cartoons, and he sat with it for a moment. The oddness of a thing that had felt so large and dangerous just becoming a sentence in a legal filing somewhere. Sylvia Vance called him directly 2 days later. He was under a 2011 pickup truck, replacing a wheel bearing when his phone buzzed on the shop floor. He slid out, looked at the number he didn't recognize, and answered it anyway. "Mr. Cross," she said. "It's Sylvia Vance." He sat up against the side of the truck and wiped his hands on his shop rag. "Mrs. Vance, I want to apologize." She said it without preamble, the way someone said something they'd decided to say before they lost their nerve. "For what happened at the office. For having you arrested in front of your daughter." A brief pause. "That was wrong. I made a snap judgment based on incomplete information, and it was wrong." He didn't say it was fine, because it hadn't been. He didn't say he understood, because understanding wasn't what she was asking for. He said, "I appreciate that. I've been thinking about what you said, about the reason you came." Another pause, longer this time. "About your daughter, Gracie. She said the name like she was placing it carefully. "The children's wing at Delwood County Hospital." I looked it up. "It's the closest pediatric emergency facility to Harlow Creek. It's where we went when she broke her collarbone last year. The staff was good. Patient. They didn't make us feel like we were in the way." He looked up at the fluorescent light hanging over his shop floor. "I heard Brunner Capital had done a deal on the hospital's property, a development agreement that was restricting their expansion plans." "They had," Sylvia said. "We've been in discussion with the hospital board about restructuring that agreement since last month. It's more complicated than I'd like, but it's moving." She paused. "That was partly because of what you laid out in that hydrology report." "Not directly, but you made me read things I should have read earlier. You made me look at a pattern I'd been choosing not to see." Everett was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car pulled into the lot. He heard the gravel under the tires, the familiar sound of his ordinary day. "The project is moving forward?" he asked. "A different version of it. No mineral extraction, no Brunner Capital. I've brought in a different equity partner, a regional conservation-focused developer. The plan is smaller, frankly, lower margins. The board wasn't pleased." Her voice carried something dry and complicated. "But the aquifer is protected, and the development footprint stays off the sensitive wetland acreage." "That's what matters." "That's what matters," she agreed. "A beat. I also want to offer you something. Compensation for what you went through. The arrest, the legal fees, the time." Dorothea handled the legal fees. Her firm's fee agreement with the estate trust covered it. "There's still the matter of what you personally, Ms. Vance." He stood up. His back ached from the concrete floor. He was 41 years old, and his knees already sounded like someone crumpling paper. "I went to your building because the water supply for 9,000 people was at risk, and I was the only person with the legal standing to say so. You can't pay me for that. It would change what it was." He thought about what to say next, and said the simple version. "What I want is for the aquifer to be protected, and for the hospital to be able to expand their pediatric wing without a development agreement sitting on top of it." Silence on the line. "Those things are happening," she said finally. Her voice was quieter than it had been. "Then that's enough." There was a pause that held something he didn't have a word for. Then Sylvia Vance said, "You're not what I expected, Mr. Cross." "What did you expect?" "Someone with an angle. Everyone has an angle." "My angle is the water," he said. "That's it." After she hung up, he stood in the middle of the shop floor for a moment, holding his phone, listening to the sound of the town going about its day. A dog barking somewhere. A lawnmower 2 streets over. The afternoon light coming in sideways through the big bay door, catching the dust that was always in the air of a working shop. He put his phone in his pocket and went back under the truck. Gracie asked about the outcome at dinner that night. The way she always asked about things she'd been waiting on. She'd inherited her mother's patience, the kind that waited quietly and then asked directly, without drama, when the time was right. She was eating fish sticks, and she asked him, between bites, whether the bad people had stopped being bad. He told her the project was changing, that the water would be safe, that some of the people involved had made different choices once they understood what they were actually doing. She thought about this for a moment. "Do you think they knew they were doing something bad?" "The main person," he said carefully. I think she didn't know how bad. She trusted people she shouldn't have trusted completely, and she didn't ask enough questions, and that's its own kind of responsibility." He looked at his daughter. "But when she found out, she changed course. That counts for something. What about the ones who did know?" He thought about Brunner Capital's exit, the terse legal statement, the pattern of 4 projects and 4 sets of mineral rights quietly acquired and quietly sold. Those ones didn't change. They just moved on to the next thing. Gracie processed this with the expression she got when she was filing something away for later. That's sad. Yeah, it is. They did the dishes together after dinner, the way they always did. Gracie washed, he dried, the radio playing whatever the classic rock station decided on that night. She told him about school, something involving a substitute teacher, and a misunderstanding about the hamster's feeding schedule that had apparently resolved itself without casualties. He listened the way he always listened, the way that meant putting everything else down entirely. Because there was a version of parenting alone where you were always half somewhere else, half in the logistics, and the worry and the long list of things you were managing. And he'd decided years ago that Gracie deserved better than half of him. Vanessa had taught him that. Not directly. She'd died before Gracie was old enough for him to really fail at it. But in the way she'd looked at him during the 4 months she was sick, that particular look that said she's going to need all of you, not the part that's left over after everything else. He'd tried. He didn't always succeed, but he tried. 6 months after the Millbrook filing, Dorothea called him on a Thursday morning with news that had been moving slowly through the courts since the Attorney General's office had gotten involved. Radnor Group, the due diligence contractor who'd used the outdated database, had been referred for a professional liability review. More usefully, the State Land Records Office was implementing a new verification protocol requiring real-time database access for all extraction and development projects. It wasn't dramatic. It was a procedural change in a government office that most people would never hear about. But it meant the thing that had nearly happened in Harlow Creek was less likely to happen somewhere else. Your father would appreciate the irony, Dorothea said. The family that saved the deed in 1958 and the grandson who filed it in 2011, and in the end it's a procedural reform that comes out of it. What was the 2011 filing? You didn't know? She sounded mildly surprised. Your father filed the appeal himself, represented himself, actually, which his attorney, me at the time when I was still at the firm handling his estate, told him was inadvisable. He won anyway. She paused. He knew exactly what he was protecting. He just didn't know if it would ever matter. Everett thought about the shoebox on the closet shelf, the handwritten note. You'll know when this matters. He was a difficult man, he said. He was. But he loved you, in the way difficult people love things. Badly, and with complete conviction. Dorothea's voice was matter-of-fact, without sentiment. I thought you should know. After he hung up, he sat in the quiet of the shop office, a small room with a desk and a filing cabinet and a whiteboard covered in job tickets, and thought about his father. About the things that got passed down without anyone saying they were being passed down. The stubbornness, the specific belief that some things were worth the cost of protecting. He wasn't sure he'd known those things about himself until 9 days ago, when he'd seen the survey stakes going into the Millbrook Road. Maybe that was how it worked. You didn't know what you were carrying until the moment you needed to put it down in front of someone and say, "This exists. It matters. I'm not moving." The Delwood County Hospital broke ground on their pediatric wing expansion that spring. Sylvia Vance's new development partner had restructured the property agreement 6 weeks after the Millbrook project was renegotiated, and the hospital board had moved quickly. There was a small ceremony, a few speeches, some local politician shaking hands, a journalist from the county paper taking photographs. Everett and Gracie stood in the back of the small crowd. She was holding his hand and eating a cookie someone had handed her, looking around with the alert, interested expression she had in places where adults were doing things she found mildly opaque. Sylvia Vance was near the front. She saw him at some point during the speeches and gave him a nod, small, direct, carrying something in it that wasn't quite an apology anymore and wasn't quite nothing, either. He nodded back. Gracie looked up at him. Is that the lady from before? The shiny building? Yeah, she looks different. How so? Gracie considered the question with appropriate seriousness. Less like she's going to arrest somebody. He looked at his daughter, at the cookie crumbs on her jacket and the cookie crumbs on her face, and the absolute earnestness with which she engaged with everything the world gave her. Yeah, he said. I think she does. They walked back through the parking lot afterward in the direction of his truck. The spring afternoon was cool and clear, the sky the particular blue that came in on the back end of a long winter. Gracie swung their joined hands. Daddy, yeah, I'm glad you did it. The thing with the envelope and the water and everything? Yeah? Yeah. It was brave. She said it the way she said things she'd decided were facts, not to flatter him. Just because they were true. Even the part where they arrested you. You were still brave. He thought about the holding room at the substation. The folding chairs, the water-stained ceiling, the long hour of not knowing what came next. I was scared, he said. Being brave and being scared aren't different things. They happen at the same time. She thought about this with the same gravity she brought to everything. I know, she said. I was scared too, but I knew you'd come back. I always will. I know, she said it without doubt, without performance. Just a simple fact. The most reliable thing in her world, taken for granted the way children take the earth for granted, without knowing what it costs to be that steady. They drove home in the early evening through the valley and up Route 9, past the Millbrook Road where the survey stakes were long gone, and the land stood quiet and green and intact. Past the gas station at the county line, the grain elevator, the Lutheran church, with the sign that always had something slightly philosophical on it. Through Harlow Creek, where people were walking dogs and coming home from work and doing the ordinary things that the ordinary evening held. He pulled into the lot behind the shop, turned off the engine. They walked home through the alley the way they always did. Inside, the apartment above the shop was warm and smelled like the morning's coffee and the laundry he'd forgotten to switch to the dryer. Gracie dropped her jacket on the hook by the door and went to tell her stuffed rabbit about her day, the way she always did, conducting a detailed briefing on events. Everett stood in the kitchen and started thinking about dinner, and the wheel-bearing job he still had to finish tomorrow, and the invoice he needed to send to the Hendersons, and whether Gracie needed new shoes for spring. The 1,000 ordinary things. The life that was exactly what it had always been, except that something in him had shifted. Something had settled. He'd stood in a room full of people who thought he didn't belong there, and he'd refused to leave until they understood that belonging wasn't the point. The point was what was true. The point was what was at stake. The point was that his daughter and 8,999 other people drank water from the ground beneath that valley, and someone had to say so, even when saying so cost something. He put a pot of water on for pasta and called to Gracie to wash her hands. She came running, still in the middle of a sentence directed at the rabbit, seamlessly transitioning to the next thing the way children did, full of forward motion, not looking back. He watched her climb onto the step stool at the sink and thought about his father and his grandfather and the shoebox on the closet shelf that he should probably move somewhere more organized one of these days. He thought about all the things that get passed down without anyone saying they're being passed down, and how sometimes you only understand what you're carrying when you finally have to set it down in front of someone and say, I'm here, this is real, and I'm not moving. And then Gracie finished washing her hands and asked if they could have garlic bread. And he said yes, and the evening went on, ordinary and sufficient and exactly enough.